The Anglo-Saxon period runs roughly from 450 to 1066 AD. Why those dates? Well, good question. Let's talk about some of that. During the first 500 years of the millennium, raiders from the north hastened the decline of the Roman Empire. Among these were the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, Germanic tribes that invaded the island of England. Of course, this island was not called England at that time. In fact, English comes from the word Angle, the Germanic. As these Germanic tribes invaded, the native Britons withdrew to Wales, and the Anglo-Saxons divided themselves into roughly four areas. On the screen before you is a map showing those areas: Wessex, East Anglia, Mercia, and Northumbria. That matters because you'll see those names popping up in literature later in the semester. Another thing you'll see is the influence of the widespread adoption of Christianity, which occurred in the 7th century. This had an effect on literacy, laws, histories, ecclesiastical writings, and other things that were propagated by the church. The Anglo-Saxons had an oral tradition of literature, and this oral tradition continued into the era of Christianity, particularly because of admiration for and performance of the Germanic heroic poetry during the Christian era. But today, most of the Anglo-Saxon literature that we know of exists in only 4 extant texts, or partially extant. The Anglo-Saxons themselves were in turn invaded by the Danes in the 9th century, and so what we know of the latter Anglo-Saxon period has come to be a rich cultural mix of influences. The values of the Anglo-Saxon heroic period remain, though. Those include, number 1, a great respect for kinship rather than geography to form the idea of a nation. Number 2, generosity is expected on the part of the Lord, which comes from the Old English words meaning protectorate and loaf, and this Lord leads men into war and rewards them with a share of the booty. Number 3, on the part of the Lord's men, what is valued is loyalty until the Lord's death, and revenge killing, or eternal shame if vengeance is not pursued. Old English poetry is often elegiac. It combines Christian texts with German heroic values. And Old English poetry uses a special kind of formal poetic vocabulary to help with memory and to enliven the vivid imagination. Things like synecdoche, metonymy, kennings, and frequently irony make this literature very rich. When we talk about Anglo-Saxon literature beginning as oral tradition, what we're meaning to say is that the literature was passed down orally. The things were told aloud and passed down from generation to generation through minstrels and family stories, but the minstrels were most often called scops. Poems usually had a very strong beat and alliteration, but they didn't rhyme. One device that helped with memorization was the caesura, which means a cutting. It's a break in a line of poetry to depict a half a line. Sometimes we use a comma for a modern effect, and sometimes we leave punctuation out altogether. But an example sentence is on the screen before you, taken from Beowulf. Another device is the kenning, which is a compound word. It derives from the Norse word kenna, and an example is something like helmbrand or helm bearer for the word warrior. You'll see several of those when you get to both Beowulf and The Wanderer, and perhaps some of the other poetry that is not assigned, but you might be interested in. Okay, so most of what we know about the Old English poetry comes to us from one of 4 texts. We can divide this poetry into the Germanic pre-Christian poetry and the Christian, and the most widely popular book is Caedmon's collection of which we will read a little bit of selection this semester. But there's also the Exeter book, the Vercelli book, and the Noel Codex that contain some very interesting manuscripts. Almost all of the Anglo-Saxon literature we have available is anonymous. We know of 12 poets from medieval sources, but only 4 of those are known because of their vernacular works today. Caedmon, we will read his hymn. There's the Venerable Bede from the 600s and early 700s, Cynewulf, and then, of course, Alfred the Great, who will get some attention from us a little bit later. That's all for this little clip. So long. See you in the next clip.